I never thought I'd become the kind of woman who stood outside her own front door with trembling fingers, hard a fist in her chest, hesitating not because she had forgotten her keys or misplaced her bag or worried about some external threat, but because, deep down, she was terrified of crossing the threshold into a life that no longer felt like hers, terrified of stepping into the empty, echoing silence of a house that had once been filled with laughter and touches and soft half-whispered conversations late at night, terrified of confronting the reflection of a marriage that, somewhere between birthdays and business trips, had quietly, insidiously bled to death without either of them noticing, or maybe, even worse, without either of them caring enough to try and stop it. It hadn't started with some grand betrayal, no slamming doors, no screaming matches that left the neighbors peeking through their curtains, no dramatic exits with suitcases rolling down the front steps. It started with something smaller, something so invisible it was almost impossible to name, missed calls that never got returned, texts that sat unanswered for days. Dinners eaten across from each other where the only thing louder than the clinking of forks against plates was the widening chasm between us, a chasm I tried, desperately and foolishly, to bridge with lasagnas cooked from scratch and new lingerie and questions asked in bright, eager voices that belied the sinking weight in my gut. When his eyes flicked past me to the glow of his phone without ever really settling on my face. Mark, my husband, my partner, my supposed best friend, didn't stop loving me overnight. If he ever really loved me at all, it was more like a slow erosion. Like a shoreline worn away one imperceptible wave at a time until one day you wake up and realize there's nothing left but wet sand and broken shells and the vague memory of what it used to be like to dance barefoot in the sun. And into that void, that wide, yawning, echoing emptiness that grew louder and sharper with every evening spent alone, every morning waking up to the cold absence of touch, every glance that passed right through me like I was a ghost, stepped Evan. Evan, who had been Mark's best friend since college. Evan, who had known me nearly as long. Evan, who had carried furniture into our first apartment and toasted our wedding with a grin so wide it almost split his face. Evan, who had, for all those years, been just another steady, reliable presence at the periphery of my life, warm, safe, uncomplicated. At least, that's what I thought. The first time he truly saw me, not the wife of his friend, not the smiling hostess at the barbecues or the polite laugh at the football games, but me, was on a Thursday evening so unremarkable I almost missed the way the world tilted. Mark was, as usual, stuck at the office. The excuse he offered more often than not these days, said with that harried, put-upon tone that made it seem like I should apologize for daring to expect him home by dinner time. I had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite meal, herb-roasted chicken, the kind I used to make when we were first married, when I still believed food and warmth could anchor a person to you, could tether love with the simple, stubborn ritual of coming home to a house that smelled like something made by hand, and when the clock crept past 7, past 8, past 9, and the candles I had lit burned down to stubs, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table alone, still wearing the dress I had chosen carefully that morning, still hearing in my head the compliments I had imagined he might say, but never would. And then the doorbell rang. I thought it might be Mark, finally. But when I opened the door, there was Evan, standing in the cool dark, a sheepish smile on his face and some excuse on his lips. Something about returning the drill he had borrowed months ago, something so small and absurd it almost made me laugh, if I had remembered how. He stepped inside, brushing rain from his shoulders, and when he saw me, saw the still-set table, the melting candles, the flicker of hope that I hadn't managed to stamp out quickly enough, something shifted in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. And in that look, in the sudden, shocking fullness of it, I felt something sharp and wild twist in my chest, something dangerous and alive, something I had thought long dead. "You okay?" he asked, finally, voice rough with something I didn't want to name. I smiled, that brittle, automatic thing women learn early, the smile that says I'm fine, don't look too closely, don't ask, and said yes, of course I was fine, just tired, just a long day. But Evan didn't look away. He didn't pretend not to see. He looked at me like I was something precious. Not the wreckage of a marriage, not the afterthought of a man too busy to notice his own wife fading into silence, but something whole, something worth pausing for. And when he left, after a conversation I barely remember, words floating on the surface of a deeper current I didn't dare dive into, he touched my hand. A simple thing. Innocent, probably. His fingers brushed mine as he passed the drill into my hands, and the jolt that traveled up my arm, the heat that bloomed under my skin, the way my breath caught, none of it was innocent at all. That night, lying awake in a bed that still smelled like a man who no longer loved me, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow, hypnotic circles above my head, I touched the place on my hand where Evan had brushed me, and I hated myself for the way my body remembered it. The days that followed blurred together, each one threading into the next with the slow, deliberate inevitability of something sliding off the edge of a table in slow motion, inevitable, unstoppable, and yet somehow still shocking when it finally crashed. At first, I told myself nothing had changed, that Evan's hand brushing mine was just a mistake, a natural collision of two people moving through a shared space, that the way his eyes lingered too long on my face was born of concern, of friendship, of pity, not God, not desire. But lying to yourself is a bit like trying to plug a leak in a dam with your bare hands. It might hold for a minute, an hour if you're lucky, but eventually the cracks widen and the whole damn thing comes crashing down, swallowing everything in its path. The first real slip came one rainy afternoon, a week after that night at the door. The sky had broken open, rain hammering the windows with a ferocity that felt almost personal, and the house, already too large, too empty, seemed to hum with a low, restless energy that I couldn't shake. Mark was, of course, nowhere to be found. A last-minute flight to Chicago for some critical meeting that apparently couldn't be handled over Zoom, leaving me to move through the house like a ghost wearing the skin of a woman I barely remembered being. I had spent the morning half-heartedly cleaning, wiping down already spotless countertops, rearranging bookshelves no one would notice, when the doorbell rang and there was Evan again, standing under the eaves with his hood pushed back, hair dark and dripping. A six-pack of beer dangling from one hand. "Thought you could use some company," he said, a little too casual, a little too careful. I should have said no. I should have smiled, made an excuse, retreated into the shell of the dutiful wife waiting patiently for her absent husband, but something inside me, something raw and starved and desperate for warmth, cracked wide open, and instead, I stepped aside to let him in. We didn't sit at the dining table like polite acquaintances. No, we sprawled on the living room floor like teenagers, backs against the couch, legs stretched out, the soft murmur of some old movie playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. It started innocently, it always does. A shared laugh at a terrible line of dialogue. A brush of knees as we shifted to reach for our drinks. A sideways glance that lingered a beat too long. At one point, Evan reached for the bowl of popcorn, his arm grazing mine, and I didn't move. I didn't shift away like I should have, didn't create the space polite society demands. Instead, I stayed frozen, every nerve ending flaring to life under the heat of that casual, accidental touch. And Evan, sweet, careful, considerate Evan, noticed. I saw it in the way his fingers hesitated, hovering just a fraction longer than necessary against my skin, in the way his breath hitched almost imperceptibly when his knuckles brushed the bare skin of my forearm. I looked at him then, really looked, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach twist into knots so tight I could barely breathe. It wasn't just friendship. It wasn't just concern. It was a longing, careful, restrained, but unmistakable. The realization settled over me with a weight I could barely carry, and for a long, dizzying moment, I didn't know what to do. Didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. Instead, I did the most dangerous thing of all. I stayed. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of stolen glances and lingering touches that we both pretended not to notice, the tension between us stretching tighter and tighter until it felt like the entire room was vibrating with it. When Evan finally stood to leave, the sky outside bruised purple and gold with the setting sun, he hesitated in the doorway, turning back to look at me, his expression unreadable, almost pained. "I'll see you around," he said, voice rough. I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak, and when the door closed behind him, I pressed my back against it and slid to the floor, heart racing, hands trembling with the weight of everything left unspoken. I told myself it was a one-time thing, an accident, a fluke born of loneliness and rain and too many empty nights. But deep down, in the dark, treacherous corners of my heart, I knew better. I knew it was only the beginning. The next week was a slow, exquisite kind of torture. I would catch glimpses of him pulling into our driveway to drop off something Mark had left at his house, jogging past the window on his evening runs, a flash of him through the kitchen window as he mowed his lawn shirtless, skin glistening with sweat under the brutal afternoon sun, and each time, it was like a tiny cut, a thin blade slicing me open in a place no one could see. We started texting, little things, harmless things, or so I told myself. A funny meme about work. A sarcastic comment about the weather. A photo of the sky turning pink at dusk with a simple caption, "Thought you'd like this." And every time his name lit up my phone, a jolt of something dangerous and thrilling shot through me, leaving me flushed and breathless and aching for more. It wasn't innocent. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. One night, Mark was out of town again. And I found myself sitting on the back porch, a glass of wine in hand, staring out into the darkness, the weight of my own loneliness pressing down so hard I thought I might shatter under it. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe the wine, maybe the silence, maybe the fact that I hadn't felt truly seen in so long I'd forgotten what it was like. But my fingers moved before my brain caught up, and I sent Evan a text. "You up?" The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, those maddening, tantalizing dots that meant he was typing, deleting, typing again. Finally, a reply, "Always for you." My breath caught. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed back, "Come over." 5 minutes later, he was there, standing at the edge of the porch, hands shoved deep into his pockets, the tension rolling off him in waves. He didn't touch me, didn't cross the threshold, just stood there, looking at me like I was something he wanted more than his next breath, but was terrified to reach for. "You shouldn't have called me," he said, voice rough, hoarse. "I know," I whispered. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, the kind of silence that says everything words cannot. Finally, he turned away, fists clenched at his sides, and disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with the sound of my own breathing and the aching, unbearable knowledge that something inside me had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And it would only get worse. Because once you remember what it feels like to be seen, it's hard to forget. Once you feel the warmth of being wanted after years of coldness, you can't untaste it. You can't go back to the silence and pretend it doesn't gnaw at your bones. You want more, and more, and more, and eventually, inevitably, you reach for it, even knowing it will destroy you. It happened, finally, on a night so still, so heavy with unspoken things, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for us to break. Mark was out of town again, some conference in Seattle. Some endless string of hotel bars and meaningless meetings that mattered more than the woman he had once sworn to love until death, or boredom, or indifference tore them apart, and I was alone, as always, moving through the empty rooms like a shadow wearing my own skin. I hadn't planned it. God knows I hadn't. But some things, once set in motion, have a gravity all their own, pulling you forward with the slow, terrible inevitability of a star collapsing into itself. Evan texted me first, just a simple need to talk. Can I come over? And before my mind could catch up to my body, before reason or decency or fear could slam the brakes, my fingers had already typed yes. I don't even remember unlocking the door. Only the sound of it clicking open. Only the sight of him standing there, breathing hard, like he'd run the whole way. Only the way the air between us cracked and sparked and stretched until it felt like something would shatter if we moved even an inch closer. But we did. God help me, we did. It wasn't a kiss, not at first. It was something slower, sadder, deeper, a meeting of broken pieces trying, failing, desperately yearning to make something whole. His forehead pressed to mine, his hands hovering close, a silent question hanging in the air between us. As if asking permission even now, even when we both knew it was already far, far too late for asking. I tried, he whispered, the words catching in his throat like glass shards. I tried so hard to stay away. I should have stopped it. I should have stepped back, closed the door, locked it, thrown away the key, screamed into the empty night until the need in my chest burned itself out. But instead, I touched his face. Lightly, reverently, the way you might touch something holy or doomed. And when he closed his eyes under my fingertips, when he exhaled like he was breaking apart just from that small mercy, I knew there was no turning back. I kissed him. Not in the wild, frantic way I always imagined forbidden kisses would happen, not with desperation or hunger or madness. No. I kissed him with the weight of everything we had lost and everything we could never have. He made a sound then, half gasp, half broken prayer, and then we were moving, stumbling backward into the house. Held together by everything we couldn't say, we lost ourselves in an overwhelming moment of emotion, holding onto each other like lifelines. Like we couldn't decide whether to tear each other apart or put each other back together. We stayed there, suspended in a moment too fragile to survive the climb upstairs. Only the way his presence filled the silence, only the way he said my name like it meant something he could never fully express. Only the way, for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel invisible. Only the way, for a few fleeting moments, I remembered what it felt like not to be invisible and how much it cost me. Afterward, we lay sitting close in the dim light, caught between regret and something we couldn't name that had witnessed our undoing. Evan sat quietly beside me, his hand resting lightly, a silent reassurance between us. Not possessive, not demanding, just there, and I closed my eyes against the rush of guilt, the tsunami of reality already crashing toward me. "What happens now?" he asked, voice raw and small, a boy lost in a grown man's body. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, there was no now, only before and after. And we were very firmly living in the after now. The days that followed were a blur of silence and half-said things. Mark came home 2 days later, kissed me on the cheek like always, never noticing the way my skin flinched under his touch, never seeing the new cracks spiderwebbing beneath the surface. At dinner, Evan sat across from us, invited by Mark without a second thought, of course, because who better to celebrate the closing of another faceless, nameless deal than his best friend? And I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, heavy, full of things we could never say aloud. I didn't look up. I didn't dare. If I did, I was afraid the whole fragile lie we were pretending to live in would come crumbling down around us. Mark laughed at some story Evan told, something about a client A missed flight, a joke I couldn't even hear over the roaring in my ears, and when I finally glanced up, just once, just briefly, Evan was already looking at me. Not smiling, not laughing, just seeing me, just mourning me. And I knew, in that moment, that whatever we had found, whatever wild, broken, beautiful thing had sparked to life between us, was already dying under the weight of what it could never be. I see him sometimes still. At cookouts, birthdays, holidays where we all pretend a little harder than usual that the walls aren't closing in. Sometimes he brushes past me in the hallway, and for one fleeting, unbearable second, our arms graze, and the memories rush back: the rain, the porch, the way his presence felt like both an apology and a silent cry for something lost. The way my body had fit against his like it was made to. Sometimes I wonder if he dreams about it the way I do. Sometimes I wonder if it haunts him too. But mostly, I just survive. One careful smile at a time. One polite nod at a time. One small, endless betrayal of myself at a time. Because that's the thing about crossing certain lines. You can't ever uncross them. You just learn to live on the wrong side.